of a journal, the Central Journal, which was published. They dedicated a special issue to the issue of 1917, the Jones Act, and the citizenship of Puerto Rico. This was like last year, and they go into all those debates, whether it was to get people to fight the war, what was the rationale, the legal rationale behind giving Puerto Rico citizenship. So if you're interested, I can send you articles from this issue if you want to read more. So all this, while these political debates are taking place, Puerto Rico's economy, as it was mentioned in the video, was being reshaped by the cultivation of sugarcane, which became the most favored or the preferred commodity, the preferred economic activity for the United States in Puerto Rico. And you know, this is sugarcane, right? Have you seen sugarcane before? Yeah. Sugarcane field. Have you been involved in cutting sugarcane?
No.
No?
Yes.
Okay.
I like that. I feel like
the United States incentivizes the cultivation of sugarcane in Puerto Rico by eliminating taxes to sugarcane that was coming from Puerto Rico to the United States. So this makes it very profitable to cultivate sugarcane in Puerto Rico, and this allows.
I know that you're showing.
So this leads to the dedication of most of the land, the good lands of Puerto Rico, especially in the coastal valleys, are now dedicated to cultivating sugarcane. And while people before, they were landless, but they had some access to free land or to unused land to cultivate food crops. Now with the need to use as much land as possible to cultivate sugarcane, people's access to land is more restricted. And while this is happening in the coast of Puerto Rico, in the central, especially in the central eastern part, there was also the cultivation of tobacco, which becomes another important commodity in Puerto Rico during this period, because even when sugarcane had unrestricted access to the markets in the United States, there were some commercial interests also that were favoring or were involved in the cultivation of tobacco, especially in the place they come from. Here, there was a lot of tobacco cultivation, was the main economic activity. It wasn't sugarcane, because it's like healing the mountains of that area. But whatever, it doesn't matter if it was tobacco or sugarcane. Most of the land in Puerto Rico was being used to plant what is called a cash crop. You know what a cash crop is?
It's only to cook to sell it.
Yeah, it's to export, it's not food. It's not something you can eat. So this is going to become a very important problem in Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico had always relied on imports to some extent, even during the 19th century. But during this period, as most of the land that could be used to plant corn or something to eat, tomatoes, because it was more economically sound or profitable to plant either sugarcane or tobacco, people would stop planting food because either they couldn't, they didn't have land to cultivate, or because it was not viable economically. So if you read my boring article, you might. Yeah, the problem that this represents for public health, because people are just eating a lot of what the nutritionists call high energy but low nutritional quality food, like polished rice and beans. In any case, the period of boom in the agricultural industry in Puerto Rico, the period where money could be made of either sugarcane or tobacco, really by the late 1920s, it begins to decay. Because first in 1928 there was a big hurricane in Puerto Rico, San Felipe, and that really devastated agricultural zones especially the fields, the tobacco fields. And then in 1929, what happened in 1929? So conditions of living in Puerto Rico were very bad, but then the hurricane and the Great Depression made it worse. Because now things were expensive, more expensive, inflation, and people were losing jobs. There was incomes were falling. So this really begins a new period in Puerto Rico's history when the Great Depression hit. And people who relied in the work that they could get in either tobacco or sugarcane fields were now unemployed or considerably had less money to buy food. So in this context, and then another hurricane hit in 1932. There was another big hurricane that undid whatever recovery was what they had done after the previous hurricane. So conditions in Puerto Rico are very dire, and in this context, the United States government realizes that they have to do something about the people, finally. And it is at this moment in time when the New Deal is established in Puerto Rico. Does everybody know what the New Deal is? New Deal?
Social reform.
Can you explain to me?
Oh, that's a long topic.
Go ahead.
Social reform, that's all I can say. Like, better education, better infrastructure, better jobs creation, housing creation, welfare creation, social security money. It goes on.
So yeah, the New Deal was the response of the United States government to the Great Depression, especially in rural areas where the agricultural industry and agricultural business in general was really hard hit by the falling of prices, of agricultural prices. And it is extended to Puerto Rico in 1933 with the creation of the Puerto Rico Emergency Relief Administration, or PREA. And it is said by historians that actually the New Deal was the most important response by the United States government to the problems of Puerto Rico since 1898, because they were paying attention to what happened in Puerto Rico. So the Depression, like the United States realizes that they have to do something with the people. And politicians in Puerto Rico also realize that now the problems of Puerto Rico are being at least heard by the government in Washington. So they take advantage of the situation to get the United States to notice them and to at least give some sort of reform measures. And it is in this moment in time that the people who are going to be very important in the political history of Puerto Rico, that you saw in the video, that they emerge because they begin to work in the New Deal. Luis Muñoz Marin, a senator, he belonged to the Liberal Party. You might find the chart. And the Liberal Party actually advocated for independence. So he was originally a pro-independence politician. And he begins to work for the, as part of the PREA, the Puerto Rico Emergency Relief Administration in 1933. And another man who was also very involved in the organization of the New Deal in Puerto Rico was Carlos Chardon, who is very involved in the creation. Sorry, I can't find any better picture. He became involved with the organization of what became the second New Deal agency in Puerto Rico, which was actually very different from the PREA, because the PRA, the Puerto Rico Reconstruction Administration, was the product of both Luis Muñoz Marin and Carlos Chardon planning and involvement, and they taking advantage of the new attention that the United States was giving Puerto Rico by managing to get the United States to give them enough power so they could create and influence the organization of this other New Deal agency, which, if you remember, you will see that it was involved in apart from reconstructing the agricultural industry in Puerto Rico and distributing or trying to find a way for people to have more access to land. They also built public health centers. They had engineers who built sanitation systems. So the PRA was a very a huge agency that employed Puerto Ricans, employed a new generation of Puerto Rican social workers, public health nurses, engineers, agronomists, to try to solve the situation in rural Puerto Rico. Through his work in the PRA, Muñoz Marin becomes a very important political figure, not only among fellow politicians, but also for the people, because he is considered to be the public face of this new relief and reconstruction efforts. So along was the director of the PRA, it is the people begin to associate services with Luis Muñoz Marin. And this is going to be very important because it said, historians, that through these interactions that Muñoz Marin had with the people of Puerto Rico, with the poor people of Puerto Rico, as part of his work in the New Deal, his position on independence for Puerto Rico begins to be reevaluated. And this is going to be very important for later. Both Muñoz Marin and Chardon and the rest of the Puerto Rican politicians and officials who were involved in the New Deal, they were trying to get as many reforms as possible to the colonial government of Puerto Rico. But it is during this time period of economic crisis that another movement emerges, another political movement emerges very strongly that opposes these tactics of accommodation and negotiation. And this is represented by Aliso Campos and the Nationalist Party. Have you heard of Aliso Campos?
From the article.
What do you know about the Nationalist Party and Aliso Campos?
That he was more radical than the others, and he wanted to form an armed revolution.
Yeah. So that was the main difference between the tactics of the Nationalist Party and Aliso Campos and these other Muñoz Marin, Chardon, the Partido Unión.
He spent many years in prison.
Yeah. Whatever party are we talking about now? So so he was opposed to these tactics that these other parties were employing to get the attention of the United States, because he said that if Puerto Rico was ever going to do, if the United States was ever to do something about the situation in Puerto Rico, it was going to be because Puerto Ricans openly challenged and confronted the presence of the United States in Puerto Rico, because they negotiated in peace with the government of the United States. And obviously this created a lot of confrontation and armed struggle in Puerto Rico during the 1930s. And one of the most remembered events related to the activism and the movement of the Nationalist Party is the Ponce Massacre, which is mentioned also in the video. Have you heard of the Ponce Massacre? Anybody?
No.
So it was.
How is this related to the March of Piedras, where like
So that was another of the ways in which the Nationalist Party and the police were confronted in the Piedras event also. It's another example of the clash between the nationalists and the U.S. government. So the Ponce Massacre was a march, in the nationalists were marching in Ponce to protest the killing of two nationalists who were associated with the killing of a police chief. And the reason why the police in Puerto Rico opened fire against the marchers, they say because they had guns and they had fire first. But the case is that at the end, more than 20 people were dead in Ponce, the nationalist marchers.
Did they find any weapons?
I don't think they did. Maybe they didn't. But this is a very visible and violent clash between Puerto Rican nationalists and the U.S. government. And because all of these things were happening in Puerto Rico, there was a lot of now the United States was really paying attention to what was happening in Puerto Rico. And it is by the late 1930s that a senator from Maryland named Miller Tidings, he proposes a bill that will give Puerto Rico independence if Puerto Rico so wanted it. Puerto Ricans were so mobilized now. Well, if you want independence, we're going to give you independence. And Muñoz Marin, however, was not, he did not think that the conditions in which this bill was proposing to give independence to Puerto Rico were fair to Puerto Ricans, because remember that by this time he's already, at least this is what he says, that he knows that the situation in Puerto Rico is very dire, that the poverty that Puerto Ricans were suffering was going to be made worse if immediate independence was given to Puerto Ricans. So he opposes this bill. He opposes this proposition of giving Puerto Ricans immediate independence with no transition. But because he belonged to the Liberal Party, which advocated for independence, he is now against the leadership of his party, who wanted to follow up on the Tidings bill. And as a result of his opposition to the Tidings bill, he leaves, or some people think he was expelled from the Liberal Party with a group of people who, like him, were opposed to immediate independence from Puerto Rico. And he leaves in 1937, or was expelled in 1937. And he eventually forms what became the Partido Popular Democrático, or PPD. And he says now that this new party that he is launching is not really, its main goal was not to solve Puerto Rico's status or to do something about the colonial subordination of Puerto Rico, but rather to attend the serious problems of poverty that most Puerto Ricans are suffering. So he says that his party is not looking for to solve the status, but to implement a series of social reform and social justice measures for the people, because he now sees himself and his party as the true representatives of the people. And this is why he chose this emblem, which is supposed to depict the Ibaro. Everybody knows that Ibaro is
a country person?
It's like the typical rural worker who's supposed to be very like manly.
Like a hillbilly, right?
Yeah, but he's supposed to be like a proud hillbilly. He was a honest and humble, but at the same time proud.
The coal fields are proud hillbilly.
Anyway, and then the words with power supposedly also meant to connect with the rural workers who Muñoz and his party were. Okay. So with this discourse of being the true representative of the rural worker, Muñoz Marin manages to obtain enough votes to become the president of the Senate in the 1940 elections. And by brokering deals with the other parties that were around, he manages to also control the House of Representatives. So through winning the elections like that, or not fully winning the elections, but managing to get enough control, he starts to put in place a series of social reform measures, as he calls them, to improve the conditions of living of rural people in Puerto Rico. And he is helped by the appointment of Rex Portaldo as governor in 1941. And he actually was a very important figure in the United States before. He was, I think, Assistant Secretary of Agriculture here. And he was very involved. He was one of the key persons of the New Deal in the United States. And he is sent to Puerto Rico. I don't know if he enjoyed that, but he is sent to Puerto Rico. And because he was so pro-agricultural reform and agricultural planning, he becomes an ally for Munoz, and allows that the support of this new governor allows Munoz to pass what is considered one of his most far-reaching reforms, known as the Land Law of 1941. And through the Land Law of 1941, the government is able to purchase land, so land that was supposedly owned by people or corporations illegally, because it was above the 500-acre limitation in land ownership that existed before, but nobody paid attention to. So now he buys this surplus land and he distributes plots among his government of Munoz Marin. He distributes plots among heads of households by using this lottery system, where and this was a very elaborated and ceremonious event when this land was distributed, and was precisely meant for people to remember that this is the party that is giving you this. It's not Luis Munoz Marin and the Populares are giving you the access.
Was there any opposition to it?
Oh, of course. There was sugar interest, and in both Puerto Rico and the United States, sugar like people who control the sugar industry were very opposed to this. Also, the other parties, which by this time are the Coalición. Yeah, Coalición was a party made up of Partido of the Republican Party, which was the statehood party, because they were still around, people who wanted Puerto Rico to be a state. And they were opposed to these measures. But because it is the analysis of historians say that because sugar interests did not have that much political power anymore in Washington, that the United States government really was not ready to come to the rescue of the people who were protesting this land distribution process. And that's what makes it possible for Munoz Marin to continue doing it.
But the people who got the land confiscated, the corporation.
No, it wasn't confiscated. It wasn't confiscated. It was purchased. The government bought that. They didn't to cover. Yeah, and they were helped in this process to purchase this land because in the war, in the Second World War, which by this time I think it started 1940, 1942. The war allows Puerto Rico to get more money in taxes, because all the, and this is kind of complicated, but the rum that was exported from Puerto Rico to the United States, the taxes that were paid by Puerto Rican exporters to the United States was returned to Puerto Rico, and this also all the distilleries and the people who make alcohol in the United States were busy preparing for the war. There was more rum from the United States entering Puerto Rico, and there was more taxes from that rum returned to Puerto Rico. And with all that extra income, the government was able to continue purchasing more land from sugar corporations or whoever owned more than 500 acres. But the extent of the scope of this program and its effectiveness in improving people's lives is still
Why would the sugar companies increase that? They have a lucrative thing.
Oh, it was a law. They had to comply.
Oh,
It was a law, and they tried to fight the law, but Washington didn't really pay attention to them.
Did they grow food on these farms?
That was one of the main ideas behind the land distribution process, so people could have access to land to plant, to cultivate, both for commercial purposes, but also to cultivate food to eat.
And they did that?
Yeah, they did that during the Second World War. Is one of the period when Puerto Rico was able to import less food. First, because the war really made it harder to import, but because the war really made it harder, they had to cultivate it. And it is the period where most food was cultivated in Puerto Rico during the Second World War. Anyway, the thing is that once the war ends, the United States realizes that Puerto Rico was still useful, because during the war, it had proven its strategic value again. And another thing that happens after the war ends is that many places and territories, such as the Dutch, the French, the British, who had colonies, they had colonies all over the world, especially the British, talks about decolonization and independence, the independence movement in these former territories or still territories of Great Britain, for example, begin to take shape. And the United States emerges from the war as this champion of democracy and decolonization and human rights. And in order for the United States to have that image of supporter of decolonization, they needed to do something in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was still a part of the United States. And those conditions end in Puerto Rico, then by this time it is agreed that Muñoz Marin had already abandoned independence as a viable alternative for Puerto Rico, because by being able to implement these measures with the support of Togo and the experience that he had by having contact and interaction with people in Puerto Rico, he realizes that independence would be economically disastrous for Puerto Rico, and that it was actually possible to get something out of the United States. That he could negotiate his way out of colonialism. So by the mid-1940s, the status problem becomes again a part of the PPD agenda de Populares and Muñoz Marin. And they begin to try to create a plan to obtain a system or a status of non-colonial association in the United States. And this begins with the appointment of Jesus Piñero as the first governor. He was appointed by President Truman, and he became the first Puerto Rican to ever be governor of Puerto Rico. So think about that. No Puerto Rican had ever been governor of Puerto Rico, never. This is the first time in history, like not even 100 years ago. And after that, the United States also passed a law that made the governorship an elective post, like an elective position. People, after Piñero being the first Puerto Rican appointed as governor, after 1947, people could vote for the governor. And then in 1948, guess who becomes governor? So in 1948, Muñoz is governor, and he from that position as governor, he has more power to, at least I think, to go to Washington and with the help of this man, Antonio Fernos, to become to obtain these reforms that they need to implement this new version of non-colonial association with the United States. And this is when the Commonwealth is important. Fernos was a public health doctor, and he had been a commissioner of health for twice during the early 1930s and during the early 1940s. And in 1946, he replaces his substitute Piñero, who is Piñero before being appointed governor, he was resident commissioner. And as the video also mentions, the resident commissioner position, the resident commissioner was supposed to represent the interests of Puerto Rico in Congress, but they didn't really have a vote in Congress, and the resident commissioner really doesn't have much power in Congress at all. So they had to make connections and get support from other congressmen to advance the interests of Puerto Rico. And this is what Antonio Fernos begins to do after he is appointed president commissioner. And after much negotiation and trying to convince other congressmen of the importance of Puerto Rico, in the late 1940s and 1950, he introduces bills in Congress that eventually became Law 600. And I think this is in the chapter you read, right? So in Law 600, the Congress finally agrees to allow Puerto Ricans to draft their own constitution. of that later will become the Commonwealth. And according to this law, as you read, does anybody remember what Law 600 said?
If they voted in favor, they would have to just take the provisions as they are. They couldn't negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
It was no room.
The Constitution has to be within the US, like has to be in accordance with the US Constitution.
So yeah, Law 600 provided for the organization of a constitution of for Puerto Rico by Puerto Ricans, but the range of options that Puerto Ricans had was really limited. First, they supposedly had the right to vote either to accept or to reject the terms of Law 600, but there was no say on what those terms were. They either voted in favor or against them. And once they voted in favor of Law 600, they would select people who will be part of the Constitutional Assembly, who were going to draft the Constitution. And then people would either reject or accept the Constitution. And then the Constitution was going to be sent to Congress for a final approval. And if Congress didn't approve it, then it was no Constitution.
Yeah.
And what happened when this Constitution was sent to Congress?
They sent it back.
Why did they send them back?
Because they were
What exactly did they agree on? Do I remember?
It was too, they thought it was too liberal. It was way too much kind of socialist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they thought that specifically a section of the Constitution that had to do with the right to employment and even the right to health, because I don't even remember it was at the
Oh,
time.
you're right.
Yeah. They thought that it was socialistic, and Reynolds and Muñoz Marin and the rest of the members of the Constitutional Convention, they tried to convince Congress that actually this is based on the UN Declarations of Human Rights. So how could this be socialistic? But at the end, they had to just give up and accept the terms, the conditions imposed by the government of the United States and Congress, which is interesting because even in Law 600, it supposedly said that people of Puerto Rico would have the right to organize issues of local government and to decide on issues of local government, even if they wouldn't have the right to decide the terms of the relationship with the United States. They were supposed to have the right to decide the organization of local government, and these were issues of local government, whether the government of Puerto Rico was going to recognize the right to employment. But even then, Congress passed judgment on those issues that were supposed to be matters of local decisions and local government. In any case, they had to go with it. And in July of 1996, the Constitution of the Commonwealth is introduced. The Commonwealth became reality. And
The article makes a point that it happened on the exact day.
Exactly,
of the invasion
exactly
of
what's
Vietnam.
gonna
I think that's important.
yeah, so why the government of Puerto Rico decided to enact the Commonwealth on July 25th.
Why?
Yeah, what you just said, I'm just making sure that. Why July 25th? Yeah, exactly.
Because that's the anniversary day of the first, when the military was elected.
Yeah. So the government of Puerto Rico was also involved in trying to substitute the colonial past for what they saw was a future of self-government with the creation of the Commonwealth. But obviously, as you saw in the video, not everybody was. I mean, a lot of people were not convinced that Puerto Rico was now a Commonwealth and not a colony. And these individuals who were in the video, they were around already in this moment in time, or most of them, arguing that actually, no, this is still a colony, a colonia perfumada, how they call it that. Yeah. So however, they were going to be very strong critics of the Luis Muñoz Marin and the Populares and all this Commonwealth idea. But there were things happening in Puerto Rico at the same time that helped the government to promote the benefits of the Commonwealth, being closely associated
Of
with
the
the
local
state.
government?
Yeah. So the thing that happened is that at the same time that the Commonwealth was being drafted and introduced, the government was also putting in place this new system of economic development that, similar to what they were arguing the Commonwealth was doing, it was instead of trying to create a local economy, the rationale was that in order for Puerto Rico to actually become modern and developed and get out of poverty, they needed to implement policies, economic policies that were aligned with U.S. interests and U.S. commercial agenda. So with Operation Bootstrap, which was the name of this economic development model, what they do is that they put in place a system of tax exemptions so that industries from the United States will agree to establish operations in Puerto Rico and hire as many people as possible to work in these new industries, which were mostly, how to say, many of them were like this, textile industries, clothing industry, that hired a lot of people. And although the wages that they paid in Puerto Rico were considerably lower than what they would pay in the United States, and that was one of the main attractiveness. One of the main incentives for them to move to Puerto Rico, they were still higher wages than what the agricultural industries paid before. So this allows for Puerto Ricans who now have higher wages, although they were lower than the United States, to start finally seeing some progress and some improvement in their lives. And if Antonio Fernández was the man behind the Commonwealth and the Constitution, Teodoro Moscoso was the one who organized this system of Operation Bootstrap, and he was the one who considered that giving these tax exemptions to these industries and bringing them to Puerto Rico was going to be the best way to industrialize Puerto Rico and improve the people's standards of living. And actually, standards of living do improve between 1930 and 1960s. One of the most important indicators of standards of living, which is mortality and life expectancy. Mortality decreases and life expectancy increases in Puerto Rico by like a lot. And so people are actually seeing improvements in their daily lives, and this contributes to the promotion of the Commonwealth as good for Puerto Rico. Actually, we don't have to be independent, because by being in close relationship with the United States, we can improve our living. However, in this time period, it's also when migration to the United States begins to increase, because all these jobs that were being created by these industries were not really enough to compensate for all the jobs that were being lost in agriculture, because agriculture was not incentivized anymore. Just industries. So all these agricultural industries that existed before, now they don't exist and they don't hire people. So these people that are not able to find employment in the new industries, they leave for the United States. And then in the 1950s is when all these Puerto Ricans start to move north to New York or to other cities or to other places in the United States. And once the government of Puerto Rico realized that that was happening and that was helping to manage unemployment, they start to actually incentivize the process of migration by creating migration offices in New York and in other places to try to help people who are moving here to not go back to the island. Then there will be unemployment on the island.
Right, at Eastern Airlines, they had to fly now, pay later. They had that whole agreement with Puerto Rico, so people can actually largely fly them, so like a credit. And so the logo was fly now, pay later, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this is when the first big migration of Puerto Ricans begins to happen. And the things that are happening in Puerto Rico are helping both the government of Puerto Rico to maintain its image of the idea that the Commonwealth was not colony, that was actually a decolonization of Puerto Rico, but it was also helping the United States as the Cold War intensified, and they need to show the world the benefits of doing things the American way instead of the Soviet Union way. And the government of Puerto Rico engages also in this propaganda of Puerto Rico as what later will be called the showcase of development and democracy. But the idea of the Puerto Rico as a showcase of peaceful revolution and an example of democratic development in concert with the United States is challenged during this period in between the law 600 and 1954, more or less. This is an interview that I'm going to show you like 5 minutes of it. So he needs to go to defend the cause of the Commonwealth in the United States. This is one of the interviews he gives, because between 1950 and 1954, the nationalist movement is still active in Puerto Rico, protesting what they saw as the continuation of Puerto Rico's colonial subordination. And they launched a series of armed protests in 1950 in Puerto Rico, and then after 1952, they moved their protests to the United States. And in one of these events, a group of nationalists actually shoot at Congress and fired at Congress, and one of the persons involved in this protest was Lolita Lebron. Does everybody know about Lolita Lebron? Have you heard of Lolita Lebron? No? This woman?
They don't teach this in a
I don't think that was either. No, you're not the only one.
That's why it's good you're taking this class.
So yeah, this woman, this is when she's been arrested. She was involved in one of the most publicized of these protests, because they actually went to Congress and they fired Congress and they injured Congress. Call attention to the fact that the United States has a colony, by the way, and we are not happy with it. But the thing is that after this happens, Fernando Cisterna is really, he needs to do something to promote the case of Puerto Rico in the United States, to emphasize that Puerto Ricans are peaceful people who are happy with the United States and they don't want to change this. People who are protesting and who are violent are only in the margins of Puerto Rico society, and there are only a couple hundred people, as he says in this video. So hopefully I'll be able to play some of this for you. Okay. How do I know if we have?
See the arrow?
Yeah, but how do we know if I have audio?
You have
When you
that.
press play, it's gonna play. And in the corner, you can.
Yeah.
It's, next one, no.
Brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Wichita Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Westnor, distinguished companion to the world honored Longines. Good evening, this is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronicles. From the CBS television news staff, Larry Lasser and Ned Gallagher. Our distinguished guest this evening is the Honorable Antonio Fernos, Resident Commissioner of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico.
There's one thing that's certain in the world today, is that the problem of colonialism throughout the world has reached a climax. There's a crisis in China, there are rumblings in Africa. And here at home, Puerto Rican nationalists have attempted to assassinate a president and have shut up the Congress of the United States to remind us that this country too has some non-self-governing territory. Now, Dr. Fernos Eastern is the resident commissioner of Puerto Rico and a member of Congress without a vote. I'd like to ask him whether or not it's true that Puerto Rico wants its independence.
No, Puerto Rico has solved its problem of self-government by becoming a Commonwealth since July 25th, 1952. The people of Puerto Rico asked Congress for that status. I had the honor of introducing the bill myself in Congress. and was passed by Congress, and it was submitted to the people of Puerto Rico in a referendum for their approval or rejection, and the people overwhelmingly approved it. Thereupon, we had a constitutional convention, adopted our own constitution within the terms we had agreed with the Congress, and submitted the constitution to the people. The people approved the constitution, the Congress ratified it, and the Commonwealth was inaugurated. So actually, we have no colonial problem in Puerto Rico anymore, if we ever had.
Well, in the U.S. there has been violence, we all know, regarding some people's desire in Puerto Rico for independence. What do you say of Puerto Rico's desire to be separate from the United States?
Well, after the Commonwealth was inaugurated, as I said, on the 25th of July 1952, we had our elections in November of that year, and the vote was 65% for the party I am a member of, was nominated by, about 20% for a party that advocates separation, independence, and 12% about for a party that advocates statehood. But I want to be fair with the parties who are in opposition to the one I'm a member of, and this group of people that would resort to violence are not members of any one of those parties, nor ours, of course. They are a very small group, not more than 500 in the whole island.
Commissioner, not all Americans have had the privilege yet of seeing your beautiful island. What is the general standard of living there compared with the United States? Is there a good deal of poverty?
There is poverty in Puerto Rico more than we have in the main. The average income is about half of the lowest income in any state. I mean, the state with the lowest income. But the ways of life and the standards of life follow the same trend and the same pattern as in the mainland.
Well, Dr. Fairnall, the emigration to the United States from the island of Puerto Rico to the mainland is, I understand, at the rate of about 50,000 a year, at least it was in 1953. What are you doing in the island itself to raise the standard of living to so people might want to stay there?
Well, we have what we have called Operation Bootstrap. We are trying to industrialize the island. Puerto Rico is only 3,500 square miles. That's all we have as territory, and it doesn't grow, while our population has been growing. And in the last census, we were above the 2 million mark. It is estimated to be about 2,200,000 at present. Naturally, as long as we were almost exclusively an agricultural community, there had to be a great deal of unemployment. In order to cope with that problem of unemployment, we have launched this program of industrialization. However, it is only natural that since we are citizens of the United States, there are no barriers in between. There is as much freedom to people of the mainland to go to Puerto Rico as there is for the people of Puerto Rico to go to the mainland. If
I'm going to stop it there. 15 minutes longer. You want to keep on? Do you have any reactions to the video?
I was wondering about like the people who didn't vote. I know there are people who didn't vote. Were they part of any group?
They were next all, I think, right?
I imagine.
I thought it was interesting how he just kept mentioning the date of Commonwealth. I think he repeated like 3 times, saying it again. Look, we are, don't forget this, July 25th. We are now officially part of the U.S. It's sort of like he actually keep just saying that over and over.
That was interesting. So he's
He was
Puerto
proud.
Rico. He's Puerto Rico.
Yes,
Yes.
he was the one
I thought he was.
who wrote he was the president of the Constitutional Assembly, and he's the resident commissioner. He's the one who managed to obtain law 600, to get law 600 passed in Congress that allowed the Commonwealth to be established. And he was very involved in Puerto Rico's politics before, in the government specifically, as a public health person, as the commissioner.
Is Lolita still in jail?
He does. she died. She died like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But she had been released.
Yeah, they were trying to get sort of a pardon for the ones that were left in jail. I mean, over and over again for years, they were trying to get them to be pardoned, and they wouldn't. Finally, they did release her. They had then she actually.
So the people that didn't vote, I imagine that when people were still, like Puerto Rico, there were places that were very isolated.
It's not here. I mean, not everybody votes.
Yeah.
People have the exercise, the power, to vote, the privilege, but they don't exercise it.
And then,
So it was personal choice.
And also getting to the
getting to the
polling
getting
sites.
to the
and
polling
also-
sites.
Also could be a way for.
and also to be aware of this. And the people who voted, like, the people who tended to vote most, this is my interpretation, are those who are very connected or very, yeah, exactly, that they considered that they had enough contact with the party and the government and the structures of the government, either through before to the New Deal, to the land distribution process, or through operational structure.
The ones that didn't vote, like politics, or they couldn't get to the point.
Yeah, many
Or they
different
just
reasons would be
protested.
of protesting. So the authors of the chapter, they emphasize the fact that in these elections that led to the organization of the Commonwealth, a good portion of the population didn't vote, like considerable amount. So they said that it was ratified by the people of Puerto Rico, so you have to wonder what that meant. Because and many people they didn't know how to read and write, so they didn't know what was written in the Constitution. they couldn't read the Constitution. So it's,
Now in Puerto Rico, it's similar, like some old women, they gotta wait for the church bus to gather them up to drive anywhere. Like they don't go anywhere by themselves, they'll stay in their house all day. Some people are like that, so they don't have houses.
so this was how Puerto Rico's situation was presented to the United States in the 1950s. And the importance of emphasizing Puerto Rico's relation to the United States and its ability to get some improvement in their lifestyles and standards of living becomes for the United States an important propaganda piece after 1959, especially. Do you know what happened in 1959? The Cuban Revolution.
Oh, I thought you meant in Puerto Rico. I was gonna say.
In the Caribbean,
I was
the
like, what
Caribbean in general. So the Cuban Revolution really raised for the United States to the promotion of the situation in Puerto Rico as a showcase of democracy. They realized how useful it was going to be for them to promote the case of Puerto Rico internationally, as opposed to Cuba.
How did the Communist Party influence policies in Puerto Rico?
Well, they were persecuted since 1948. The government has a law, the GATT law, 1948, that they managed to persecute and really neutralize all of these nationalists and communists and leftists and radicals in Puerto Rico. Many of them go to Cuba eventually, right? They go to Cuba and they are the ones who are moving this whole situation forward. Trying to make the international community know that what happened in the UN, that you saw in the video, that the United States was able to say that Puerto Rico was a self-governing territory and stop sending it, as the chapter that you read explains, and then consider it a self-governing territory, therefore it didn't have to inform the United Nations of the situation in Puerto Rico. But these people who leave Puerto Rico or who are identified in one way or another with the nationalists or the independence movement, they continue to use the UN.
So the nationalists of the Communist Party? Or
It's very possible.
I mean,
I wanna
that's something that I
identify who they
really
are.
hear often about Communist Party of Puerto Rico.
They mentioned it in the
Yeah, they do,
article.
but
and I
it's usually
think that
quashed. I'm saying it's still something that you have the freedom of speech.
they wouldn't
it's
let
not so
witch
free.
hunts like here.
Yes, it's not so free.
In any case, the government of Puerto Rico continues to try to build this idea that Puerto Rico that there was progress and people were happy and that everything was going perfect. And by the early 1960s, they decide that they need to reshape and realize their industrialization strategy to try to bring in another kind of industries other kind of industries that instead of hiring low skilled or not necessarily too many capital investments in Puerto Rico, like textile industries, that they could pass out and leave Puerto Rico as soon as better opportunities emerge somewhere else. So they try to bring to the island new industries such as petrochemicals and electronics that will make a higher investment on the island. It will be harder for them to leave once these tensions expire. And all these changes in political society were really having an impact also in the political views of the people, as that generation of individuals who is now growing up under these circumstances begins to associate the improvements that they are having in their lives, not necessarily with the PPD, but with the relationship of Puerto Rico with the United States. And it is during this period, the late 1960s, that the state of movement in Puerto Rico starts to grow. So because people now are associating their progress of Puerto Rico with the United States. And these changes that were happening in Puerto Rico society also had an impact in the PPD, in the populares themselves, as the new leadership is challenging the old leadership to give them space to retire and let the new people take control of the party. And because of that crisis, Marin finally decided, and he nominates Roberto Sánchez Vilella to be the new candidate for governor in the elections of 1964. He was not, however, an outsider. He had been with the PPD since the early years, and he was actually the secretary of Muñoz Marin while he was governor. And then in 1964, he becomes governor, the first governor of Puerto Rico, Luis Muñoz Marin. So he's the second governor of Puerto Rico under the Commonwealth, Roberto Sánchez Vilella. And then it is under Sánchez Vilella's tenure as governor that the first attempt at changing the terms of the Commonwealth in Puerto Rico started, being, as it was mentioned, I believe, in the video, because Fernando Cicern, although he openly said that Commonwealth was a colony, that Puerto Rico's colonial situation was solved, he knew that there were things that were not right with the Commonwealth, that Congress still had the power to legislate without Puerto Rican consent, and that the Commonwealth really had no powers over trade. They couldn't, all of the things that were mentioned in the video. The Commonwealth really had no powers because the terms of the relationship between Puerto Rico and the US had not changed. So he starts to try to get support in Congress for federal government to try to revise these terms, and to improve or enhance the Commonwealth. And this concept of enhanced Commonwealth is going to become now the objective of the PPD, to enhance the Commonwealth so it will have actual powers, some sort of autonomy, at least in local government. And although these efforts really he wasn't successful with most of these efforts. The most concrete result from Antonio Peno's new campaign to enhance the Commonwealth is the celebration of the first status plebiscite in Puerto Rico, which happened in 1967. And as you can see, Commonwealth won. Commonwealth is this part here of the chart. And independence was really losing a second from people.
You think it won because of the support of the governor?
Probably.
That's what the article said. He wants supported independence and flip-flop.
Of course, yeah. And people associated all the improvements they had in their life.
So if he would have maintained independence,
probably we would be independent. Who knows?
So he played a pivotal role.
Yeah, of course. He's the father of the whole Commonwealth. But what this plebiscite showed for the PPD and the populares and the Muñoz Marin and the leadership was that although the statehood movement was still a minority. It was on the rise. It had considerable support from it showed that people were beginning to consider statehood as an alternative to Commonwealth. And the pro-statehood party at this moment in time is the Partido Estadista Republicano. And they were divided. They didn't know. I mean, some parts of the party wanted to participate in this plebiscite, but there was another faction of the party that was against participating in the plebiscite. However, the people who were in favor of participating in the party eventually left this statehood party and formed a new party, which is eventually becomes the Partido Nuevo Progresista, or PNP. And the people who are in favor of participating in the plebiscite were led by an individual who is actually in the video. He is called in the video Elisa. And he manages to channel all this growing pro-statehood and pro-U.S. Movement that was beginning to grow in Puerto Rico. And in 1967, he formed the Partido Progresista, or PNP, and they participated in the 1968 elections as the candidate for governor. And he wins the governorship in 1968. So this is the party that managed to unseat the PNP, the DPD, in 1968. And then this is why I have this as a new period. It was for the first time the domination of the PPD in Puerto Rico's politics is challenged successfully by this new party.
I have a question. Because when I think of the plebiscite, the truth of the matter is that if, let's say, they voted for statehood, I mean, we're not talking about the fact that the Congress would never accept that. That's important because, I mean, the idea of having, 3.5 million people, when you talk about the House of Representatives, we're told by, by areas and the population, that's a whole bunch of Puerto Ricans in the Congress. There's no way in hell it's going to happen.
That's
So why even bother with all this?
That is one of the aspects of this plebiscite that are going to be happening now periodically in Puerto Rico is that they are non-binding, meaning that Congress is to pay attention to whatever Puerto Ricans say. Like, you can say you want statehood, but we are not really going to do anything because we haven't committed ourselves. Congress and pay attention to the results of this.
And it started with Teddy Roosevelt when he went to Puerto Rico and he said he put in writing, they will never be, they said they will never be our people, they'll never be good enough to be a part of our country. So it's already in stone.
Yeah, so then this man becomes governor from the statehood party from 1969, 1973. It shows how, although Congress was never going to accept Puerto Rico as a state, at least in the terms that this party was proposing, the movement was growing. But the period of statehood government in Puerto Rico, the pro-statehood party, ended. It was only 4 years. In 1972, in the elections of 1972, the PPD won again the elections with this man here, who was also in the video. Let me see if I can get his name.
He was the best looking governor, I'm telling you.
And notice the little guy with the little kid behind. This is probably one in a campaign. But he became the new PPD governor in 1972. And one of his main agendas and his main objectives becomes now to obtain this enhanced Commonwealth and to make Congress pay attention to the situation in Puerto Rico and to develop or enhance the Commonwealth to give it more powers. But these efforts were unsuccessful for a change. And he then has to face a new economic crisis in Puerto Rico, which happened in the mid-1970s. Probably around the time that this video was filmed, was it?
The 70s.
Yeah. So in the 70s, the mid-1970s is when the economic recession happened as a result of the oil embargo don't know if you're familiar with that.
The
So
oil energy crisis.
the oil energy crisis, exactly. So that the economic recession that comes as a result of that crisis it has a lot of impact on Puerto Rico, has a lot of negative effects, and then unemployment begins to grow again, and so the economy of Puerto Rico begins to experience a period of contraction because now on top of that, many of the industries that were established through these tax extension laws, many of these laws start to expire, so these industries begin to leave to other places where they can pay lower wages, where there are better tax exemption measures. So what the Hernandez column does is that it takes advantage of a tax reform process that was taking place in Congress. And what the United States government was trying to do in this moment in time was trying to bring back wealth that you raise in foreign banks in order to avoid taxes, paying taxes. Governments have been wealth in foreign banks. So the United States was trying to bring the states, and the Hernandez column piggybacked that on those initiatives, including the territories and Puerto Rico in a tax reform law that would allow these corporations. This is a very boiled down. I'm not even sure how to explain this properly, but corporations that would establish that will have operations in Puerto Rico or in the territories would get to the U.S. from those operations without paying taxes. So they will be depositing their wealth in U.S.
They didn't even have to put it in overseas.
No,
banks.
because the idea was to bring it back to the U.S. So the banks in the U.S. had more, cash flow. But in order to do that, they needed to have incentives. So they said, well, if you build a plant, if you're a pharmaceutical and you build a plant in Puerto Rico, the wealth that you generate from being in Puerto Rico, you can send it back to the U.S. and not pay taxes. So as a result of, and the thing is that if you notice, now that becomes the new economic development study in Puerto Rico, and the dependence of the U.S. for the Puerto Rico economy now it's even more dependent because this law wasn't even legislated in Puerto Rico. This law was legislated in Congress, and now this new administration was using that as its economic strategy to bring new industries to Puerto Rico. And this was eventually becomes the 936 section of the Internal Revenue or whatever code. And these industries, these new industries that are now allowed to Puerto Rico are known as the 936 industries. And one of the most important sector now becomes the pharmaceutical sector of the 936. So yeah, a lot of pharmaceutical companies now go to Puerto Rico. And it becomes one of the most important sectors for the Puerto Rico economy because they could now do all this, they could generate all this wealth and bring it to the United States and not pay taxes. And another column inaugurating a new pharmaceutical plant and being, Puerto Rico is progress, there is progress and there is growth and we are happy. But in order for the government to actually face the economic crisis of the mid-1970s, they also relied on another form of increasing the dependence of Puerto Rico to the United States, because it is during this period that federal welfare programs are extended to Puerto Rico, like the most important one being the food stamps program. So now not only the government is directly relying on Congress to keep this tax exemption policy going, but the poor people in Puerto Rico are growing more and more reliant and independent on the federal welfare transfers through food stamps, for example, to Puerto Rico. And another thing that happens during this period is that the government begins to borrow more money to compensate for the loss of revenue as industries like Puerto Rico before the 1960s.
Did they borrow it from?
They borrow private private companies in the United States because Puerto Rico is not yeah, it's not a country, so it couldn't go and ask money to the IMF from the International or the World Bank. So they do it right through the private lenders in the United States. So two different ways in which Puerto Rico becomes more and more dependent on the United States.
Do you think that I would think Commonwealth is it similar, not so different than the Platt Amendment? I mean, that's what I think about the Commonwealth.
No.
I mean, in the sense that they can't do anything squad without the government doing that
Well, the
kind of
Platt Amendment gave
With the-
Nicholas the right to intervene.
Exactly.
But it didn't have to intervene. But, in the Commonwealth, it was constant.
But that's what I'm saying is that it's really sort of a pseudo kind of constitution. It really was Commonwealth. It's just don't have it right now.
But then Puerto Rico didn't make it easier on themselves. Because, I mean, obviously there are constraints. There are only so many things governors and administrators can do to try to develop the economy in a more autonomous way. And but this time period really becomes the beginning of what we have now, which is the crisis, the debt crisis, and yeah. But after engineering all these programs and all these new strategies to improve Puerto Rico's economy, it's not surprising that then the state movement is even more strong, it's even stronger, because now everybody is dependent on the U.S. The poor, the rich, everybody. So the pro-state movement now devises a new, taking advantage of the situation, they devise a new discourse that is really going to make use of all these new ways in which Puerto Rico was dependent on the U.S. and particularly on the welfare programs that many Puerto Ricans now rely on, and what some historians can call the welfare statehood, because this discourse of welfare statehood becomes very important, and it brings a new PNP candidate to the governorship in 1976. So Carlos Romero Barceló becomes governor in 1976 by very strategically changing the statehood discourse. Instead of being as embedded before, instead of being, oh, we are U.S. citizens, therefore we should be part of the United States because we are U.S. citizens. But it becomes a way for saying people who are against statehood for Puerto Rico are really against the poor who now need the U.S. even more than ever because of now all this welfare transfer. And this discourse is very popular, becomes very popular, and it keeps the PNP and the statehood party and Romero Barceló in power for 8 years. And even today, the idea that if Puerto Rico becomes independent or whatever other state status, the idea that, well, people are going to lose their food stamps. That's a very huge demagogic way to avoid talking about independence or to scare people. But during this period also, the pro-independence movement becomes very active again in the context of the whole social movement and mobilization of the 1960s and 1970s. And they organize different events, protests, and they remobilize during this period. And the Romero Barceló administration is aware of this. Anyway, he is aware of this, and as part of his strategy to try to neutralize again the pro-independence movement, one of the most talked about events that happened out of the clash between the statehood governor and the pro-independence movement is what is remembered today as the okay, so the Cerro Maravilla murders, which is when these two men two nationalists are killed by the police because, as the government says, they were trying to commit acts of sabotage at an electrical power facility in Ponce, in an area called Cerro Maravilla. But later, investigations later showed that it was actually, this was part of a broader agenda of the Romero Barceló government to try to harass and suppress the pro-independence movement by persecuting pro-independence leaders. And this becomes a very important scandal in Puerto Rico, the Cerro Maravilla scandals, that really contribute to end the image of the police killed them because they said that they were trying to sabotage, commit acts of sabotage in an and this Cerro Maravilla murders and the controversy behind them really contributes to the PPD to return to power, because the way in which the Barceló administration was later recovered to have been involved in these murders really made the people angry, even those who were for him and who were for statehood. And in this way, we have that this guy who was governor before, Romero Barceló, Hernández Colón, he returns to the governorship in 1984. He is elected governor again. But now he has to immediately come to the defense of the tax reform of the 936 industries, because they are going to attack in Washington, who actually against this whole process, this whole program of incentivizing industries to establish themselves outside the United States, and they want to bring them actually in the United States and not in the territories. So this tax reform and these industrialization mesh programs that he established before, he has to now go to Washington and defend them. But at the same time, he's trying to get powers for the Commonwealth. So he's engaging in two contradictory agendas. As you can see, he is, because the reason why these pharmaceutical plants were in Puerto Rico was because, since Puerto Rico is a territory, they were considered foreign to the United States. So that's why they could send their wealth back to the United States without paying taxes. But now he's trying to go to Washington at the same time to get more powers for the Commonwealth. So he is recognizing, on the one hand, that Puerto Rico is a territory, and he is using that as part of his economic strategy. But then he is also defending the Commonwealth by saying that it is not a colony anymore. We want more powers, but it isn't really a colony. So the contradiction of the Commonwealth itself becomes really visible when the economic agenda and the political agenda don't really go hand in hand. And at the same time, what he does in Puerto Rico to try to differentiate his administration from the previous administration of Romero Barceló, who was very involved in this scandal against, regarding his treatment of the nationalists, he starts doing these things. His administration starts doing these things to try to emphasize Puerto Rico's distinct national identity, so they could gain the favor of the independence and nationalist movements. And what he does, one of the most bizarre things he does, from my perspective, is that he passes this legislation in 1991, making Spanish the only official language in Puerto Rico. And because when he does that, the people of Puerto Rico receive an award from the Prince of Spain, because Puerto Ricans now become these champions of the Spanish language by passing this legislation. So this is a picture of the governor receiving the award from the Prince of Spain. Look how young he is. He's a king, right? He's a king. So this is a period when in order to differentiate themselves from the state movement and to gain both the electoral favor and the favor of the public in general, the PPD becomes a party that emphasizes the Puerto Rico's distinct national identity, and this is one of the examples of this strategy.
It's so interesting because after in 1898, English became the official language in Puerto Rico. I don't know if you're aware of that. But
Yeah.
So the schools had to be taught in English, everything for it, but it was a huge failure. So I think it's interesting that the Americans would do that, but and now he's doing
And then I think too, that's supposed to be both. It's supposed to be English and Spanish, both are supposed to be official languages, but he goes and changes the law and says, no, now there's only Spanish now, don't you dare speak English. Anyway, he was election, unfortunately for him, of 1992, because, and while he was doing this, actually, he was also trying to cut down on government, the growth of the government. Government was one of the main employers in Puerto Rico, and until recently was. And to try to I don't know, to make the government smaller, he proposes the sale of one of the most important public corporations of Puerto Rico, which was the Puerto Rico Telephone Company. So he's the one who proposes it initially, but it's really rejected by Puerto Rico society, and the public opposition was enough that he forgot about the plan. But then his successor in government actually had that inside. I don't know why this is doing this. Okay, here we go. So after he loses the 1992 elections, Pedro Rodrigo of the Stable Party, or the PNP, he becomes governor, and I call this government restructuring and the new state offensive, because he not only wants to privatize as many government services as he can, he also is doing that to promote his agenda to finally get status for Puerto Rico. And he is doing these things because now in the United States there was this new conservative movement was growing, and in order for him to sell statehood in Congress and in Washington, he had to show that Puerto Ricans were no longer this pro-big government and pro-big public sector people. So he made these two agendas, the statehood agenda and the privatization and neoliberalization, about the whole neoliberalization movement in the 1980s and 1990s. Yeah, so he's the one who implements these policies in Puerto Rico. And he sees those two agendas as closely linked. One is going to advance the other. The privatization was going to advance statehood. The privatization was supposed to be a way of selling statehood in the United States. And the first thing he does to show the United States that statehood was popular in Puerto Rico, that at least that was his plan, was to organize an plebiscite, which was considered non-binding. Congress hadn't said that they were going to pay attention to the results of this. The results of this plebiscite, but he goes ahead anyway, and he organizes a new plebiscite in 1993, where unfortunately for him, statehood loses. It loses to Commonwealth. And it's important to remember that the definition of Commonwealth that is being used in this plebiscite is the enhanced Commonwealth definition. So it's a wishful Commonwealth that the PPD is able to use in these elections. Is the Commonwealth with more powers. So it's what they are trying to get from Washington since 1967. And those statehood loses this plebiscite, as you can see, 46% to 40, almost 49%. For the first time, Commonwealth failed to achieve more than 50% of the vote. So for Jose Joe, although he loses, and he is able to go to Congress and say, no, you didn't give me permission to do this plebiscite, and I'm showing you anyway the results. And he begins to realize that actually he might have a shot at getting some sort of legislative congressional support for and eventually at a later time. And that's what he does. His administration pays a lot of people, lobbyists, to go to Congress and promote different legislations and different efforts to try to get to convince Congressmen to consider statehood as a possibility for Puerto Rico. And at the same time that he was doing this, he was trying to promote statehood, he implemented the other part of his agenda, which was the privatization of government services. And one of the most important part of the government services that was privatized was the public health care system that was put in place since the 1950s. There were a series of government-owned Centro de Diagnóstico y Tratamiento, and public health care centers that had been allowed to decay for years, that the government didn't have the capacity to keep them going as ideas as good as they should have, and not that happy with it, but it was low cost for public. And Professor Joe, one of the most remembered things he does is that he sells these public healthcare centers, and now the government, in substitution for those public healthcare centers, he subcontracts, is the only way I can think of it, private insurance companies to give people private insurance. Where with this new private insurance card, like this one, which this is from a later day, but it's a bad picture, but I can't find any other. The people now had access to a selected group of private physicians and private hospitals they could go to with their new insurance card, which was, the idea was that because they were not directly receiving health services from the government, it was a more efficient way of delivering healthcare services. But at the same time, the government was still the one paying this new private healthcare insurers to insure people. And the administration of this program becomes a burden for the budget, for the government budget, even though it was supposed to downsize government. Because Rosario was hoping to take advantage of the healthcare reform that was being proposed here in the United States, and that was never approved. But because that didn't happen, the Puerto Rico government had to take responsibility of the whole bill of running this program. And we will see how now running this program for the government of Puerto Rico is one of the most expensive things that the government has to do. Even when it originally was meant to downsize the government, it did the opposite. So while he was moving forward this plan of privatizing healthcare services, he also moved forward the plan of selling government agencies. He actually managed to sell the Puerto Rico Telephone Company, which really got people in Puerto Rico were opposed. Many people were opposed to this. There were protests, and the way in which the Rosario administration repressed those protests is still remembered as a very conflicted and violent period in Puerto Rico's history. But he moved forward with the privatization anyway. And at the same time, he moved forward with the state agenda also by organizing another plebiscite in 1998. And this time, this plebiscite is very different from the other plebiscites, because instead of defining Commonwealth as the enhanced Commonwealth that the Populares, the PPD, the preferred definition. The preferred definition is not in this plebiscite. And because the preferred definition of the PPD is not in this plebiscite, and they define Commonwealth as a territory, as an incorporated territory, or what it was, but they didn't like that definition. So they, instead of voting for the Commonwealth as it was defined, they managed to get a new alternative in the plebiscite that read none of the above, ninguna de las anteriores, because according to them, none of the status options that were present in this plebiscite were what people wanted, because the Commonwealth was not in this plebiscite. And it turns out that the none of the above option wins the election. So people didn't really, it was presented as a very, like, people had gone insane in Puerto Rico because, like, what do you want? None of the above. We did something else. And as you can see, the statehood, I mean, if you remember, statehood also got more or less the same amount of votes in the previous, same proportion of votes, 46% of the vote in the previous election. And the Commonwealth had received less than 50% of the vote in the previous election. So actually, there were people who were voting for the none of the above option who were not really for the Commonwealth. And it is said that many people simply voted for the none of the above option to protest many of the policies of the Rosselló administration, which were by this time very unpopular, and especially the celebration of this plebiscite, which happened like 2 months after the last major hurricane hit Puerto Rico in 1998, Hurricane George. So people were not really happy with Rosselló. And in the context of this defeat for Rosselló in this plebiscite, a bunch of scandals, corruption scandals, began to be uncovered when many of his administration officials are charged and convicted of embezzlement, bribery, and downright stealing of public money. And it was a very publicized, this arrest of public officials was a very publicized event in Puerto Rico, and the most remembered case is that of the Secretary of Education, who was just recently released from jail after he was charged and convicted of all these corruption charges. So in this context, as you might expect, the PNP and the state party loses the election. It would be terrible if they had won again. And in 2000, a new governor is elected in Puerto Rico. And this new governor is Sila Calderon, and she is the first female governor in Puerto Rico. She was elected in 2000. But unfortunately, Sila didn't have good luck because, like, all the bad things started happening when she was governor. And she didn't significantly change the policies that were put in place by Rosselló, by his predecessor. And she, when she is governor, is when the first signs of the economic crisis that is currently happening in Puerto Rico began to emerge and surface. Rico didn't have special access to the United States market anymore because there were many other countries and regions of the world that now have free trade agreements with the U.S. So this special relationship between Puerto Rico and the U.S. and Puerto Rico could shift and could have this free trade between Puerto Rico and the U.S. was now not exclusive of Puerto Rico. Also, the 936 industries and then the 936 tax exemption was set to expire. So many of these 936 industries that no longer had an incentive to be in Puerto Rico, they start to leave around this period when she is governor between 2000 and 2004. And this period of crisis for the Commonwealth political and economic system that we have today was kind of anticipated by a person who was very closely involved with the creation of the Commonwealth. And this book is published in 1997. Yeah, and this book really is kind of the last nail in the coffin of the Commonwealth, because he was a member, a very important member of the Constitutional Assembly that wrote the Constitution. And by the late 1990s, he's already saying, this is not this Puerto Rico is still a Commonwealth. We know this. We knew this from the beginning. And he also explains in his book how the continued independence from the U.S., both economic, especially the economic system of Puerto Rico, is going to represent a major problem for the island. And I think the publication of this book can be seen really as the beginning of the loss of acceptance among Puerto Ricans of the Commonwealth as Puerto Rico's decolonization. the best of both worlds as a compact between Puerto Rico and the U.S. And this is what's going to happen in the following years, where we are going to see up to the present day how people in Puerto Rico are less convinced that the Commonwealth is actually, that there was no Commonwealth, and Puerto Rico continues to be a colony of the United States.
One of the things that he also discusses in the book is the United Nations and how that they're supposed to vote to support Puerto Rico's independence, but because the U.S. controls these countries financially, they're always going to have support the U.S. position because they count on the U.S. so much. That's why one of the reasons that Puerto Rico came by using the United Nations support, because we pretty much support the United Nations.
So then, when the successor of Calderon is Aníbal Acevedo Vilá, and it is during his governorship that the whole thing collapses. In 2006, when finally the 936 section of this tax reform program expires, and all these 936 industries leave, employment grows tremendously. It says that Puerto Rico experienced a loss of 22% of its manufacturing jobs once its industry began to leave. And I left Puerto Rico in 2007, so I kind of, left, right, and I didn't plan this. But one of the things it does to try to compensate for the loss of revenue is that the first time he establishes a sales tax. And how it is called in Puerto Rico as the IVU, Impuesto de Ventas y Uso. And I don't know if you can see this cartoon, but I think it's very, very funny. It was such an people were so not used to sales tax because there had never been a sales tax in Puerto Rico. So then he's like asking for, you have to pay the IVU, so now people are giving money away to homeless. This obviously is not enough, the implementation of this sales tax. First of all, because the magnitude of the price is too big. And second, because people just found ways to not pay it. Like currently, the evasion of just this morning, people talking about more than 50% of what's supposed to be collected through this sales tax doesn't reach the government. Because people people do not charge the IVU, like the store sells you something, they simply don't charge you.
You pay for cash.
Yeah, or they do charge you and they keep it for themselves. So yeah, this hasn't been successful. And the context of this economic crisis that begins in the early 2000s, but finally explodes in 2006 and 2007, 2008. The PPD loses the elections of 2008, and this guy becomes governor, and he becomes now the one who has to. I don't know if you can. I just love the way that he's portrayed in so many. Can anybody translate what it says in this or say? So he becomes one in the context of this economic crisis, and what he does is he tries to downsize the government, and to do that he starts building on what Rosselló had done before, but he goes even further because he lays off many people, he fires many, his administration, in order to control the government payroll. They lay off thousands of government workers, and the exact number of layoffs is a matter of debate, of course, but regardless of how many layoffs, this law number 7, which is the law, the legislation that allows for this, government restructuring, regardless of how many people were left out of work, they joined all the thousands of other people who had lost their jobs when after the 936 industries left. So it is in this context that at least, he had to defend the rationale for this government restructuring policies by calling medicina amarga, like it has to be like a bitter pill, but we have to have a choice. It is in this context that this new migration, this new migratory wave for Puerto Ricans to the United States happened. And different from the previous migration, this time, people are moving to Central Florida as Central Florida, the southern United States, where they are really shaping politics, local politics, and they are becoming a threat to the Republican domination in these places in Central Florida. And the exact composition of demographics of these new migrants, the article you read, I believe, mentions that they are mostly middle class professionals. But the article that I distributed also actually says that these people who are living in Puerto Rico are no different from what is in Puerto Rico, because they are not different from people who are still in Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is highly educated, like people are very educated in Puerto Rico, so people who are living are proportional, like the amount of professionals is proportional to the amount of professionals, to the proportion of professionals in Puerto Rico. So it's not that all the smart professional people are leaving the island, it's just that there are a lot of people, unemployed professionals in Puerto Rico that just have nowhere to go. It's in this context that now in the last elections of 2012, we had 6 political parties for the first time, because there were 3 new political parties that were in this election. As you can see, this is a reflection of satisfied people become with the 2 main political parties. And although none of them managed to get enough votes, the factor there is a reflection of how people no longer believe in the Commonwealth. Yeah.
Have a majority.
Yeah, but what, money less party?
No. It's the 3 new parties are this one, the Movimiento Unión Soberanista, Puerto Rico, and then this one, the PPD, is actually one of his candidates for governor, was the co-author of the book you read a chapter from, Rafael Bernabe. So he obviously didn't win. He didn't even get enough votes to make it to the. but and like his website here, este partido, I don't know if it's not for help.
A few minutes. What about the police corruption? Terrible problem.
The police corruption?
Yeah.
So part of what is happening in Puerto Rico now is so drug trafficking and the underground economy is becoming an alternative for many people. And as government services and government jobs go now are no longer enough for people to survive. Policemen, law enforcement agencies are getting involved in trying to survive in the situation.
You were so you think that only like one down from time, or it's always like the kind of right? How was the time before that left? Before how was the kind?
Well, so it was if you were a tobacco planter, if you were a sugarcane central owner, if you were a worker, it wasn't good. It was said that poverty was growing in Puerto Rico, meaning that although people had wages, most of them were the
I have
one question, because I gotta make an announcement.
Can you elaborate a little bit about race relations and the race relations in Puerto Rico as opposed to like Cuba or Jamaica? Or
so what happens in Puerto Rico is that
what do the black people believe in over there?
well, first of all, there are no blacks in Puerto
There's no black.
You can't call someone black who's black.
It's either Triolito,
Yes, there's no such thing.
I mean,
Oh, because it's my father said.
They're only Puerto Rican.
That's right.
They're not black.
There's
Yeah,
no
you,
black.
no, they're black, but you can't.
Oh, I'm so confused.
But the
No,
thing
no,
is,
let-
the thing is that after, especially after 1952, the whole idea that after the Commonwealth, the whole idea that Puerto Ricans, there were no blacks, there were no whites, they were just Puerto Ricans, and the idea that race was important is completely diminished. I mean, people don't talk
So
about
they
it.
ignored it.
They ignore it, and even though if you go to Puerto Rico now, the more colorless you have, the likely you are to be in a poor living region. And if you go to the medical school, for example, how many black people are studying for medicine in Puerto Rico? 3, and the whole school. It's a fact that there is racism, there is racial discrimination, but it's not something that is acknowledged and it's not talked about because the official is that we don't differentiate.
That's what you're saying?
Yeah, and
There's no
then
pride
there
for
is a recent movement that has been taken to try to recreate African traditions and the African heritage in Puerto Rico's culture because it's there. It's just something that was not before, now it's more, but before was not really acknowledged or even talked about.
Anyway, first of all, before you leave today, give me the summary of the chapter that we read. And for next